add that as a note to it, we call it, and sometimes on the materials you'll see in college, sometimes the materials from the College Board, it will say an exogenous supply shock, meaning something outside of the model, right? Something that we didn't anticipate was gonna happen. So what could cause an increase in production costs? Well, recently, firms have been dealing with tariffs, right? And the anticipation of a trade war, right? And those types of things would cause production cost to increase. And then that as a whole would cause the nation maybe to shrink a little bit, the economy, but this is again overstating some of that. So what's the result of this, Michael?
Price level will increase and real GDP will decrease.
Very good. Okay. All right, Mike. Who's got number 9 for us?
Max.
Max, new technology and better education increases productivity.
Short run goes to the right, price level goes down and real GDP goes up.
Right. So this one we would say is an investment in human capital. This is what Ireland did, is they invested in education, teach more technology, they advanced one of the things they did, but they advanced their economy in a great way going forward, from where they were to where they went to in the 90s. They had investment in technology and in education, made them really a technology hotspot for a lot of places. Okay. Max, who is going to answer increased confidence for the future economy? Sean, what do you think? Increased confidence.
The AD is going to shift to the right.
Good.
And price level and real GDP are both going to increase.
Perfect, right? So this that you guys have seen along the way, and you can mark it on this one or any of them, this we call demand pull inflation. Because what's pulling up prices? Right, so again, add that there, demand pull inflation. We've seen it multiple times, but this is an example. So there's inflation, but why do we not mind demand pull inflation as much? It's what?
People are making more money.
Yeah, the nation's income is increasing, consumption is increasing, right? And we can slow it down if we need to. We can raise interest rates by decreasing the money supply. We can raise taxes. We can lower government spending. It's easy to control. When we have cost push inflation, it's definitely more of a challenge. All right, Sean, who's going to answer number 10? No, 11, I'm sorry. FASA is reduce taxes and increase government spending. FASA, what do you think?
I said the AD as well.
Now, you notice there's something else on here, right?
Yeah.
So something to note is we're starting where here? Yeah, we're at full employment. We're at our long run equilibrium. Okay? So now we're going to do what? What's going to happen with the change? Now, Faiza, you said it correctly. AD will shift to the right. So what gap did we just create? Which one? Inflationary. Mark down here that this is full employment output. Mark the new spot. It's to the right of our potential, meaning we're overusing capital, people are working more hours. These kinds of things are part of an inflationary gap. All right. There's a couple of things we need to get to this process for it to make sense. Shh, listen. Okay. When there's an inflationary gap, you can write this to the right of it. Inflationary gap, we have a couple tools we can use. Number one, monetary policy. Decrease the money supply. You can shorten that however you want. We can decrease the money supply. Later on in the semester, we'll learn that's called selling bonds. The central bank sells bonds, they're taking in money, they're reducing the amount banks have available. So make sure you add that to your notes. Michael, you haven't moved yet. The next one, fiscal policy. Increase taxes, reduce government spending. How's that look for a politician? Increase taxes, reduce government spending. Yeah. Most times we don't see a lot of fiscal policy for inflationary gaps. What we do have are something called automatic stabilizers. Anybody ever remember anything about those? So our income taxes as a nation, the federal income tax rates, go up as a percentage as you earn more income, called marginal tax brackets. You ever heard of those before? So what happens is as you move through the brackets, you, me, Bill Gates, we all pay the same amount on the first $10,000, $15,000, right? But as we progress, that's the progressive piece, and eventually, let's say you earn $1 million, that last 500,000 is taxed at 35%.
Why do they do this like that?
So marginal tax brackets, a lot of economists feel are good because the percentage increases as you go there and it helps balance out. Remember we talked about the marginal propensity to consume? But certain nations, those marginal brackets at the top can hit 60%, right? So in the Scandinavian countries, you've had them way at 60, 70%. We had them in this country really high before, almost as high as 90% for the top income. And we've moved them down over the years. So when President Trump's plan with Congress went in to reduce tax brackets, it went from 39.68, something like that, down to 35%. So, and then he changed some of the others as well. So that's how we use taxation often, is most popular when we reduce it, but that can create deficits. So those are your two choices during an inflationary gap. Here's what's called we call it the natural process. So here's what happens without any intervention. Okay, and this part you need to write down. This is something we're gonna look at next week on our test. But we have to understand that a lot of people believe that this can happen, it can fix itself naturally, right? Okay, so we call it self-correction. When there's an inflationary gap, is unemployment low or high? Unemployment's low. Okay, so what does that do to wages? So if unemployment is really low, what's going to happen to wages? Increase. Good. And what do we say happens when the cost to produce increases?
They produce less.
It does what?
The SRAS will shift farther.
SRAS will shift to left. So here's where we are currently. This is our inflationary gap. Make sense? Looks like this? Yes? Okay? So under self-correction, we said there's a couple things that will occur. One, and the number one is that we need to understand that the unemployment rate is low. But this is the unemployment for land, labor, and capital. They're all really low, meaning that we're using our capital, right? We're depleting it at a faster pace. We're hiring more people to do more hours, or maybe have to pay people more so we don't lose people, kind of like what's happening now, right? Remember we said your wages are going up mostly because they're having trouble finding and keeping them, right? So those are the types of things that happen. So the unemployment rate is low, okay? So this is from the inflationary time period. Wages begin to increase. Just using one of them as an example, even land prices would increase, vacancy rates change. So wages increase. That's increasing cost, right? So now SRAS is going to decrease. Again, this happens over time. So this is called a short-run equilibrium. So this means in the long run, what's going to happen? So we went from here, this is step one, to here, step two. Short-run equilibrium, long-run equilibrium. Remember, this is like a magnet. So the economy can return to this point over time without any correction from the central bank or any correction from Congress. But why don't we wait? Why don't we use this more often? Why don't we do this more? How long does it take? Maybe 5 years? Could be 10 years, could be 2 years, right? Depending on how flexible your labor force is, your labor laws. But in our country, Congress, remember, they get reelected every 2 years, correct? Presidents are every 4 year, but for them, they're affected by midterm elections, aren't they? So a president knows that if Congress turns over, things get a little bit more challenging. So really, every 2 years it matters, which means we don't have the patience, most often, to wait for this to occur. So instead, what do? What do we call those other two things? Fiscal and monetary policy, good. Okay? That's what ends up happening because we've decided we can't wait that long, it's too painful. So what happens if there's a recession then in the self-correction model? What do we say? What happens to the unemployment rate? Goes up, wages go, and SRAS shifts. Right, we could have done that, right? Some people said last recession, we shouldn't have bailed out banks, and we shouldn't have bailed out General Motors and Chrysler and General Electric. We should have let them fail. Everything would have flattened out, it would have restarted, and the economy would have grown back at some point stronger. What's wrong with that option?
A lot of people are unemployed in the process.
Yeah, we have a lot of people unemployed. We had what? Right, people losing their houses, right? There's a lot of frustration, and again, we had to do something. So, how did Ben Bernanke get the Time Person of the Year? Because of the editors, and the people felt that what he did was he created an environment where he saved the economy from a free fall. That's the kind of stuff we don't have patience for. And it makes sense though, okay, to a certain extent. But you could also see the logic of self-correction. Okay? All right, so go to the next page. That's his middle one. All right. For each of the events below, make additions to the graph. Now, this one, that's all you're doing is changing the graph. Say what will happen to the aggregate demand curve, the aggregate supply curve, real GDP, price level, and there's a new one at the bottom I want you to put a star next to, unemployment. Okay? So take a few minutes and do that with a partner.